Yeah, I'll grab myself one of these Bibles in front of the pew where you sit. It's page 852. We're going to read this together. So this is the New International Version of the Bible. We're going to focus on Hebrews 12, verse 1 to 3. Now, there's something that you need to know, and this is true of different parts of the Bible. There are certain chapters that they form one reality. They come in together. And Hebrews chapter 11 and Hebrews chapter 12 are those two chapters that, if you're going to really benefit from it, you've got to read them together. So even though our focus this morning is 12, verse 1 to 3, I'm going to ask you to read the last verses of 11, which are verses 39 and 40, which kinds of throw us back to what is recorded in chapter 11. There's a long list of people. Let's call them, these are faith warriors from the past. So we're going to read from 39 to 40, and then we'll shift to 12, 1 to 3, and then I also want us to read verse 7 and verse 11. That will give us a fairly good feel of our message for this morning, again from the book of Hebrews, all right? So if you have one of these Bibles with you, it's page 852 and 853. So we will read from chapter 11, 39 and 40. All right, this is the word of the Lord. Let's read together. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, so that not only together with us would they be made perfect. Again, as I said, this throws us back to the rest of chapter 11. Now we're going to read the first 3 verses of 12. Now you notice that the first word is therefore. That's a conjunction. Now the reason why you have that word there, therefore, it's basically to say, hey, this is a continuation of what you read before in chapter 11. So the use of the conjunction is to tie 11 and 12 together. So which is what we read 39 and 40. So now let's go to chapter 12, verse 1 to 3. Again, I'm looking at this Bible, if you have it, and we're going to read together from these 3 verses. Everybody. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race cut for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Verse 3. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Now already you picked up the title for our sermon for today. What's the title for today? Fix your eyes on Jesus. Now again, just to get a feel for the text, let's go down to verse 7. Again, if it's this Bible, it will be page 853. Verse 7. Alright? You see the purpose of discipline. Let's read together verse 7. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? Interesting verse. So let's go down to verse 11. All right, here is discipline again. Verse 11. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Interesting. So discipline, sometimes we don't want it because it's painful. But at the end, according to to Hebrews chapter 12, it will grow us in terms of righteousness. His name is Eliud Kipchoge, a Kenyan marathon runner. In fact, you may want to do your reading after today, but he is the greatest marathon runner of all times. I remember watching him run the Berlin Marathon in 2018 and breaking the record of running a full marathon, that is 26.2 miles in 2 hours. I mean, incredible. Now, the distance from my house to the church is 19 miles. Sometimes it'll take me an hour to drive, and I'm driving. And even coming on 205, but it takes me driving 45 minutes and only 19 miles. Full marathon, by the way, is 26.2 miles. This guy runs that distance in 2 hours. Let me give you some statistics for yourself. He's the twice the Olympic champion, 2016 and 2020 in terms of the marathon. And as I said, he held the record from 2018 to 2023. If you have time, you may want to go and watch one of those videos of this guy running. It's incredible, just incredible. This again is Eliud Kipchoge. I thought I want to share with you in relation to what we've read in our message for today, some of the discipline and some of the principles that govern the way he trains and runs. So here's something that you can see on the screen. Only the disciplined ones are free in the life. But I like the next statement. When you plan very well and prepare very well, then success can come your way. By the way, you can apply this principle to anything in life. You can apply it to church. You can apply it in terms of your own spiritual journey, if you may. You can apply it to school and at work. Plan, prepare, then you will have success. Here's another statement that I appreciate, again from this guy, Kipchoge. If you work hard, follow what's required and set your priorities. I mean, that's part of this thing about discipline. You got to prioritize. Life is so busy. But if you're going to go places, you got to set your priorities and say, I'm going to focus my eyes and work on these 2 or 3 things. Quite incredible. And this guy actually practiced this in his own life. Like this found a statement from him with regards to being in the starting line. See if you can read together with me. You can sit behind me, everybody. When I'm on the starting line, my mind starts to review what I have been doing in the last 5 months. So running a marathon, it's not just what happens at that point in time, but rather all of the preparation 6 months before. But he's saying, but when I'm standing in the line, waiting for that gun to go, so I'm reviewing in my head all of the hard work that I have done, and believe in myself. I know I can do it. I know I am the best. Consequently, he is the best marathon runner of all times. What does this have to do with the Christian life? Well, there's quite a lot, and I'm going to take you back to Hebrews chapter 12. But I thought I'd share with you these 4 things that I pulled out, reading through his story and his experience, that you may find this very helpful for yourself. This guy runs 120 miles every week. Runs, not drive, runs. I mean, it's quite impressive. And then if he's training for a marathon, he would go to a high elevation, 9,000 feet above sea level. And he would run there so that he can really work on his lungs. He has a very simple life. starts every day at 6 in the morning. I know some of us starts our day at 5. I start my day at 5. That's when I get up. But this guy consistently starts his day at 6, meaning he sets up priorities. And the last one, which is very true, in life, it's not the force and the power and the strength that you bring to something. It's your capacity in your mind to structure and to think stuff through. I thought I want to share this with you because here's somebody who's very successful as a marathon runner. And I think there's some things that we can learn from him in terms of running this race of faith. So let me take you now to Scripture. Now what you're seeing on the screen, I decided this time, even though we have read from the NIV, I decided to have for your consideration these verses in the New Living Translation. It's kind of very clear and easy to read. So let me ask you to read together with me what you see on the screen. I'm also highlighting for you some very important things in the text. All right? So it's the same verses that we read prior, but this is from the Living Translation. There are 2 slides with text. So let's read together. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping what? Our eyes focused on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Continue reading. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. Think of all the hostility he endured from sinful people. Then you will not become weary and give up. So here is Paul saying, hey, there's something to learn. There's something to reflect on, thinking about Christ and his own endurance of the cross. Let me give you the big picture. Now remember, and by the way, for those of you who've been to a couple of those workshops that we had here in the morning about how to read the Bible, how to write an outline, I'm giving you a little demo, if you may. You'll notice that for this sermon, I only have 3 points, and then I'm also applying the 2 sub-points to every point. We'll get to that in a moment. But here's a biblical context, just to put us into the picture. Read together with me, all right? So big picture, then we'll come back to those few verses. The Apostle Paul presents the Christian life in Hebrews 12, verse 1 to 3 as a what? As a marathon, not a sprint. Let me make that point. Not a sprint, but a marathon, meaning it's a long run. Continue reading, second line. In this race, followers of Christ are challenged to live a life of discipline and endurance. As Christians, we are counseled to put aside anything sinful and unchristlike that may hold us back from crossing the finishing line, Jesus Christ. Let me pause there. Very interesting as you read Hebrews chapter 12, that the way that Paul is writing here, the actual finishing line is Christ himself. So he's the goal. He's the ultimate end, if you may, of this race of faith. So Christ is the finishing line. Again, the second line from the screen down the bottom, author and finisher of our faith. And to encourage us on the way. Here's something very interesting. This connects us to Hebrews chapter 11. And to encourage us on the way. Here's what God has done. God has placed in the grandstand of the universe other faith champions from generations past. And that is basically what we find in Hebrews 11. So he's saying, hey, fix your eyes on the finish line, but also know that there in the grandstand, there are people cheering for you. And we will get to look at a couple of people in our sermon for this morning. So you have these faith champions from generations past That's Hebrews chapter 11. To cheer us on. Fourth line, and now this race, everybody. Now this race was never meant to be easy. But Jesus has already run the marathon for us. Through his cross, we too can share in the joy of communion with the Father. But in the meantime, what do we need to do? Fix our eyes on Jesus. Alright, partly kind of learning in terms of how you put all of this together, but also to convey to you our message for today. So, I have 3 points. So here's a kind of a brief outline. So you see 3 points and 2 sub-points. The 3-by-2 rule of speech making and also preparing a sermon. I want to start this morning by looking at the grandstand of faith. So I'm going to go to Hebrews 11. Pick up a couple of people. In this case, Abraham and Moses. See what we can learn from them. And then we're going to look at the race of a faith. And this aspect of endurance and discipline. Finally, when we get to the end, we want to look at the reward of a faith. We're going to look to these processes that we call justification and sanctification. So that's kind of the roadmap. That's the direction we're heading. But let's start with a grandstand. So I'm taking you back to Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1. Remember that therefore is a conjunction, ties us to Hebrews chapter 11. Therefore, we are reminded that there is a group of people in the grandstand who are actually cheering for us. One of those people, by the way, is Abraham. And I'm providing a reference for you there, 11, verse 8 to 12. So what can we learn from Abraham, who is there on the grandstand, but who also been part of this race of a faith? Well, here's what we know. Abraham obeyed God. He was prosperous, he was doing well in the city of Ur. But then God said, hey, I've got a better plan for you. Now, I'm not giving you the details, but I want you to relocate, to move elsewhere. And then when we read in Genesis, and again we read in the book of Hebrews, Abraham obeyed God. The other thing that we can learn from Abraham is the fact that in his own journey, Abraham knew that he was only a stranger. He lived in tents. Never built a stable structure. Because he knew, no, I'm not here forever. There is a better place that God is preparing for me. Now, I think there's something that we can learn from this aspect of Abraham's journey. And that is, we need to constantly remind ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is not our final home. We are sojourners. We are tourists. We are passing through because God is preparing something better for us. What do you say? I think we would be very foolish if we think that the end of life for us is here on this planet Earth. And that's why, as we read Hebrews chapter 12, we are reminded, hey, you've been following God. And so Paul is affirming us for following God, but he's also reminding us, never think that life ends here on this place. There is a better place that God is preparing for us. Going back to the grandstand. There on the grandstand we also have Moses, who is cheering for us. Now when you read Hebrews chapter 11, this is what the Bible tells us. Moses chose to suffer together with God's people than to claim the royalty and the power of Pharaoh's house in Egypt. Because again, Moses knew that there was something better coming for him. So he said, no, not this royal family. I'm part of another royal family, and I'm waiting for that time. So he did not focus on the treasures of this world that pass away. One of the dangers in the Christian life is the fact that we can be absorbed with the things of this world that will pass away. Moses knew that these things were only there for a temporary time. But there was something better that God is preparing for us. So this is how we finish off by looking at the grandstand, looking at Abraham and Moses. All of these people, according to Hebrews chapter 11, all of these people, when they died, they were part of this race of faith, but when they died, they never really actually received or arrived at the final destination, because that is just something in the future. Now, church and friends, this morning, we're doing well here on earth, in Oregon, in Portland, but we need to remind ourselves there is something better. God is preparing a place, a city, and the architect is God Himself. So cheer on, be happy, run the race. There are others who are cheering for you from the grandstand. Let's look at this race of faith. We read a couple of verses in chapter 12, looking at this aspect of discipline and also endurance. Think of Kibuchi, the marathon runner, and how he believed and how he lived these aspects of the marathon. He was disciplined, getting up 6 in the morning, running 9,000 feet above sea level, preparing for a major marathon. He lived simply. But this idea of being disciplined was very important to him. Let's look at the Christian life. What are some of the discipline of the Christian life? Well, number one, Bible study. I am so grateful that our church here at Rockwood, we have a dedicated time. It's called Sabbath School, where we would spend time looking at this curriculum developed for us. Because the more we study the Bible, the more we would know Christ. And then there's a discipline of a prayer. And I know many of you will hear me talk more and more about prayer. But this is part of the discipline of faith. Worship. Being regular, meeting with God's people on the Sabbath morning. I know sometimes we may not feel like coming to church. But we know it is important. It is part of the spiritual discipline. Because we can only grow and we can only be strong when we are together. So when we read Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 3, again you see that the last line at the bottom of these particular slides. So all of these aspects of discipline and endurance is to make sure that we will not give up, that we will not give in, that we will not stop halfway through the race. Because we know all of these trials, if you may, that we face on a regular basis, weekly, this can only help us to be strong, as it were. You know, I find it very interesting when you're reading Hebrews chapter 12, the use of the word endurance, that is repeated often. Now, you remember, as I said to you, when you're reading the Bible, when you see a concept or word used often, you know that is important to the author. And that takes you to the mind of the author. So endurance and discipline, these are important parts of the Christian journey and this race of faith. Let me take you now to the last part of what we've been learning today about this marathon of a faith. Remember, I said to you, according to the writer, the finishing line is Christ Himself. So on the grandstand, you have Moses and Abraham and Enoch and Joseph, you name it, who are clapping and cheering for us. But at the end of the race, guess who's there? Christ Himself is there waiting for us. Now, there are two concepts that are very important in the Christian life, and I want to touch on it very quickly, because this is what Christ is about for us. The first concept is a concept of justification. Justification simply means that when God looks at us, He sees Christ. And we are declared righteous, not because of our works, but because of the works of Jesus on our behalf. We are justified every day because of Jesus. There's another part, and related part of the race, if you may, that we, Seventh Day Adventists, talk about a lot. It's called sanctification. Now, I know sometimes we say that justification is the work of God, but sanctification is my work. Actually, that is not true. Sanctification simply means this is Christ living his life within me through the work of the Holy Spirit. So we are justified by faith, and we're also sanctified by faith. All that God requires of us is our cooperation, our willingness, not only to receive the gift of God in Christ, but also to allow his Spirit to work in us. Eventually we will get to the end. But the way to get to the end, as we have said before, is to be disciplined, to endure, and to constantly focus on Jesus. That the Christian life is all about Jesus. It's not about me, but it's all about Jesus. So ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, as we come to the end of 2024, I'm reminded of a coach that we had, a friend of ours, when we were living in the East Coast. The four of us did quite a number of runs, including some half marathon. And I remember our friend Connie saying to us, one of the disciplines that you need to learn is that you need to finish strong. Doesn't matter how you start the race, but you must finish strong. So how do we finish strong? I want you to keep these two things in mind, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Number one, you got to persevere. Recognize that some of us this year have been going through all kinds of challenges, mental challenges, physical challenges, economical challenges. And perhaps we, at this point in time, are tired. But in order to get the reward, in order to get to the end, you need to persevere. We need to finish the race strong. Recognizing that seated there in the grandstand are other people who are cheering for us. And we know that we can finish with their support. And finally, we've got to keep our eyes at the end. Some of the important scenes for me is I have watched some of the Olympic races in the past. And perhaps you may have seen some of this as well. Is where you see another competitor getting very close to the end and then they would fall. But then somebody would come around and they will pick them up and try to help them to get to the end. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the good thing about this race of faith, Christ has the capacity. Christ has the power to come and help us when we are struggling, when we feel that perhaps we will never finish the race. We know he can pick us up and take us with him. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Focus on Jesus. The future is better. We know that he's preparing something better for us. But in the meantime, we've got to persevere. That's why we're going to invite you now to join us as we sing this last hymn, I'm pressing on the upward way. And I know that every day, Christ is going to give us that strength and that ability to make sure that we're heading the right direction and we will finish the race.